everybody. Thanks for listening to 15 Minutes with Fuzz. If you didn't hear last week, I have moved the show to Tuesdays. Yes, we launch on Tuesdays now instead of Mondays because it fits into my life better. Welcome to my life, by the way. My name is Fuzz Martin, and each week I cover positive things happening in and around Washington County, Wisconsin. I always try to cover things that I don't know about or you might not know about, and this week, that's one of those things. It's another upcoming referendum. There are 2 to 4 referendums on the November 8th ballot in Washington County, depending on which part of the county you live in. It might be 3 to 4, but it's definitely 2 to 4. And most of us in the northern half of the county will have the Moraine Park referendum, which I covered in last week's episode. There is a Germantown/Richfield sewer and water referendum. There is a purely political non-binding referendum. And then there is the fourth, which is the Anti-Crime Plan Referendum. Some might say it's the first. And that referendum would increase staffing in the Washington County Sheriff's Department. Notably, it would increase the number of deputies on patrol, a number which has not increased since the 1980s, even though the population of the county has grown substantially and the number of households has doubled. This week, Washington County Sheriff Martin Schulteis joins me to talk about the anti-crime plan, details on what we will see if it passes, and why the anti-crime plan is needed. And with that, here are 15 minutes on the anti-crime plan referendum with Sheriff Martin Schulteis on 15 Minutes with Fuzz. Sheriff Schulteis, thanks for joining me today. I appreciate you coming in. I want to talk today about the anti-crime plan that is going to be on the November 8th election referendum. If you could give us a bit of a background on the need for this referendum and what people can expect in the bill. I know that's kind of a broad brush here, but there's a lot to learn about this, right?
Sure, yeah. So it certainly is a big ask, and the county certainly knows that. It's a $3.6 million referendum where it bumps the tax. It's a one-time bump, but it's a permanent bump because we are asking to increase the staffing at the sheriff's office by 15%, which equates to about 30 and a half full-time positions.
Staffing at the Washington County Sheriff's Department has been about the same for years, right?
The amount of deputies that we have on patrol, so the deputies that are seen out in the community, that really hasn't changed since the late 1980s. Our department itself has gotten larger. We have a bigger jail, we have a bigger detective bureau, we do court security. So we've added personnel, but it's not really the direct services that the residents see. I can give you an example of that.
Sure.
So our staffing minimums on first and third shift in the late 1980s was 5 deputies that covered the entire county. It's 436 square miles, and it's really any given weekend, holiday. Currently, that's the same level of staffing. Mm-hmm. We increased it on second shift to 6 deputies, but if you can imagine breaking that down, it's a large area for them to cover.
Now, since the 1980s, when that level was that same size, pretty close, how much has Washington County grown since then?
Substantially. So
Okay.
The population back in the late 80s was about 85,000, and now we're hovering around 135,000. So the amount of population is about 50,000, and even substantial to that is the number of housing units in the county has literally doubled in that same amount of time.
Okay, so there's more households. Not quite twice as many people, but that's because there's smaller families probably, right?
I'm guessing that's exactly it.
Yeah. So now we talk a lot about, crime we're seeing with drugs and things in our area, especially, fentanyl and some other opioid issues. What are we going to see if this anti-crime plan passes? How is that going to help deter those crimes and help reduce that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So when I started doing these community presentations, we had 25 overdose deaths in Washington County, and one is too many. Mm-hmm. We're up to now 31. The year's not even over. And to give you a comparison, in 2019, we had 12. So, it's a substantial jump. Almost 90% of the overdoses are fentanyl related.
Okay.
That is clearly the problem. So one of the things that I really want to address is the sheriff's office runs a multi-jurisdictional drug unit. It's composed of several different agencies. We're the lead agency in it. But one of the things I'd really like to be able to do, one of the positions in this referendum would be assigned to a federal task force. And I told my staff I was a little hesitant at first, not sure why I would want to put county resources into a federal task force. But I actually sat down with the special agent in charge of the federal DEA down in Milwaukee. And he explained that when you have a municipal officer on a federal task force, the whole design is that they proactively seek out the high-level dealers that are bringing, I call it poison, it's not even drugs anymore, that's really what it is, into our communities. And DEA just has a lot more, deeper pockets. They have more resources, and we would establish a relationship with the U.S. Attorney to pursue these federal charges. And I think that would send a very clear message to individuals that think about bringing that stuff into our community.
With those fentanyl problems, there's not just, overdose deaths, of course, are the horrible part of this and ruining families and lives, et cetera. But there's more involved with just people doing drugs. There's also break-ins and other types of crime that goes along with that. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I can give you an illustration. We do some interdiction patrols out on 41, southern part of our county. We don't do them very often. We've maybe done 3 or 4 in the past couple of years, and it's amazing to me in a 4-hour interdiction. And these are very taxing because it's a lot of mutual aid and overtime, but the amount of contraband and criminal charges that we see coming into the county, it's staggering. In fact, one of them we even had last time was a homicide warrant of an individual from Milwaukee that was coming through the county. But because of that main corridor running diagonally across Washington County, the crime is just not isolated to I-41. What happens is that people get off and then commit crimes right off of 41. We're seeing that time and time again with vehicle break-ins, stolen vehicles from Milwaukee that are dumped off, and then one of our community's cars are taken. And even some more dramatic cases of home invasions, just tragic stories. And it's really all because of the drug trade that's going on to our south.
With this anti-crime plan, we would have an increase in the number of patrols that are out. How does that increase from that? You said it was 5, 6, 5, right? First, second, third shift. There's 5, 6, and 5 patrol cars. What will we see if this passes?
There's 2 kind of aspects to that. So the minimum staffing levels would go from 5 to 8 per shift. So it would be 8, and actually 7 on third shift. And that would allow really the whole philosophy behind policing is to deter and prevent. And officers try to do that when we can. But right now I think we're at 34,000 calls for service, and it's a little tough to do that preventive and proactive stuff when they're busy going from call to call. But then the other part of that that's not counted in that shift minimum is a mental health team that we would deploy that would be in addition to that staffing level.
Okay. Can you tell us a bit about what that team would look like?
Sure. Yeah. So, and this is not a new model. It wasn't my idea.
Sure.
It's a model that has been gaining traction in Wisconsin and actually all through the U.S. But it's teaming up a law enforcement officer with a clinical social worker in a squad car. So they're riding around together. It's probably not a marked squad car. The officer's probably in uniform or not in uniform. But what it's designed to do is kind of 2 things. There's a reactive part of it. If there's an individual that calls our office and is in a state of crisis, that this team can be dispatched to that residence. And the whole idea is that law enforcement is going to respond first, but we want to get that mental health professional on scene as quick as we can because they're trained in it. Whereas we try to train in it. We're cross-trained on so many, jack of all trades, master of none type of thing, that the mental health professional really could kind of bring down the temperature of that. And so we don't have those altercations between people that aren't well and law enforcement. Then there's also the proactive part, which I think is just as equally important. And that's because our mental health professionals in Washington County, they have a litany of individuals that they know are just kind of on the fringe and have some issues, but may not be in that crisis mode yet. But we want to be able to touch base with those individuals and just to see how they're doing, to offer direct services, have that mental health professional develop the relationships as close as we can, right at their front door. And the whole idea is to keep them from going into crisis. So they're not having law enforcement contact. They're not having, have to go through the criminal justice system, and they stay out of our jail with it. That's not where a lot of these people belong.
Again, it goes back to prevention and instead of that reactionary side of putting somebody in jail.
Right. Absolutely.
Now, We in Washington County, I think, are very proudly conservative with our pocketbooks, right? So people are going to want to, they need to know going into the polls of what this is going to cost the county. And you and County Executive Showman and others have laid out a very good plan that details exactly what that looks like. Can you give us a bit of what taxpayers can expect if this anti-crime plan passes?
Sure, yeah. So I will be the first to admit that the referendum question is not very clear, and it's the first three words of it describe it all under state law. So it's written for us. We can only insert some of the numbers and what the plan is. But what I can say is, so it's a $3.6 million bump in the levy. Levy right now is around $37 million. It would go to a little better than $40 million. And so it's not an additional $3.6 million every single year. It's that one-time bump to pay for the 30 positions. The math behind it is very hard to grasp. So we'll take a median home in Washington County is, we'll say, about $300,000. It's probably a little less than that. But in that neighborhood, as long as your home was not reassessed last year or you didn't do any remodeling to it, so if the value of the home was $300,000 last year, pass or fail, the referendum is going to decrease the tax rate. It's really a question to constituents, how much do you want it to decrease? So if the referendum passes, the tax rate will go down 9 cents per thousand. And that equates on a $300,000 home to about $27. So it passes, it goes down $27. If it fails, it goes down even further than that. It goes down 27 cents per thousand, I believe.
Okay.
And that equates to a $81 reduction in your county as part of your tax levy, not the schools and the municipalities. We can't control that.
Sure.
But that's a $54 difference, and that's still real money to voters. So that's why we want them to make the decision for us.
But either way, just to restate that again, either way, that part of the tax levy is going down. So whether it passes or not, it's just a matter of how much goes down. So, and to go back to what we spoke about at the beginning of the show, is we've been at the same staffing levels on the patrol cars since 1980s.
Yeah, I started in 1991, and that's what the staffing levels were. And ironically, the sheriff during the late 1980s happened to be my father. And so I could personally interview him and find out what the staffing levels were. And he confirmed to me that at least 1988, the staffing levels were just the same. So, Sheriff, can you talk about the crime statistics that you're seeing? What kinds of crimes outside, we talked about the drug crimes, but what other things are you seeing? Specifically, what I would say is that we're experiencing a lot of out-of-county crime that individuals, I guess I should rephrase that, individuals that don't reside in our county are coming into our county and victimizing our citizens. One of the most telling stats for that is we look at our bookings in our jail every year, and they were down a little bit this past couple of years because of COVID, but normally they're about 4,000 to 4,500 bookings every single year in our jail. And what we're learning is that over half of them, those bookings, those individuals don't reside in Washington County. And when you're talking 2,000 to 2,200 bookings every single year, individuals that are come into our county, commit crimes, if it wasn't for that, we probably wouldn't have to have a 321-bed jail facility. We could probably be much, much smaller than that. So it's not just even population based on how our county's population has grown. Now you're seeing that influx come from other counties, which puts that extra burden on top of that, right? Yeah, absolutely. And I actually even touched base with the executive director from the National Sheriff's Association just to get a sense from him if that's normal for jails throughout communities. And he said to have over half of your population from out of county, he said that's highly unusual. But I would attest that to the fact that we're near a highly urbanized area. Are there ways to work with, I know you're working with, you were just mentioning working with Milwaukee County on the drug side, but are there ways to work with the other counties to help prevent crime coming through here, or working together with Milwaukee County and Waukesha? We typically, the drug task force that I mentioned, all of those task force try to work together as well. And because it's quite simply, criminals don't care what municipality they're committing the crimes in. They don't pay attention to county lines and municipal boundaries. So you have to have that kind of cooperation. So I always say, whether you wear brown or blue, we're all on the same mission. We all want to keep our community safe, and I think we do a real good job. You had mentioned to me earlier that you're seeing a lot of increase in internet crimes. Can you talk a bit about that? Sure, yeah. So there's a couple of different avenues. The first one is scams, internet-based scams. Those are absolutely skyrocketing. And the major ones that our Major Crimes Bureau takes care of, they take anywhere between 3 to 6 months and 200 hours to try to get to resolution. And it's not the manpower that bothers me. We've had several cases this year where individuals have lost in the neighborhood of $100,000, $125,000 their retirement accounts. We do everything in our powers to try to intervene and stop the money transfer. And a lot of those stuffs are overseas based, so it gets a little tough. But those we just see as skyrocketing, not only in the terms of the frequency, but the magnitude of it. It's really troubling. The other area that we look at, it actually makes me sick to my stomach, is we call them, everyone refers to them as child porn investigation. It's called child sexual assault, sexual abuse materials is a term, law enforcement term. But those types of investigations are constantly going on in every single municipality in this county. The sheriff's office is not excluded from that. In fact, we just kind of looked at our stats last year, and it's up 250% increase in our investigations from last year.
Wow.
Those are heavily technology involved, very time consuming, and they can take months to resolve with court subpoenas for IP addresses. And those are the things that we need to really get on top of, because we don't want those offenders to take that next step from the online version to the versions. That's
scary stuff to think about, especially being a father. I know that as part of County Executive Showman's platform and the county as a whole, it's always been trying to keep government small. And obviously adding more staff is, it's the opposite of keeping things small. But I know that for County Executive Showman and yourself to want to put this forward, that there has to be a need, right?
Yeah, so it definitely has two different philosophies kind of conflicting, certainly. So the county historically, the tax rate has been going down and down. The tax levy is actually lower than what it was. The county itself, workforce has actually shrunk by, I think it's 8% over the past several years. The amount of buildings that we own, all that stuff has been shrinking. So we highly value the idea of smaller government, lower taxes. But then there's that other contrasting part of the need for public safety. And those two ideas kind of are colliding right now. 15% in our staffing, and that equates to about a 4% total reduction in staff throughout the county through the time, but it's still growing government. That's really why we put this out in front of the voters of Washington County to tell us which one's more important to you.
As a business owner, I think being right-sized is important as being frugal, right? So being able to serve, in your case, your customers are the constituents of the county, and being able to be right-sized for this county and not sized for where we were in the 1980s is probably would make me feel safer, but everybody gets to make their own decision when they go to the polls on November 8th.
And I wish we probably should have been doing these incremental increases over time. I kind of use the analogy that the best time to plant an oak tree is 40 years ago, and the second best time is today. And I just think that if I didn't at least put forth a plan to the constituents of Washington County to have them tell me what level of staffing that they want, that I'm kind of failing them as their sheriff. So that's really what this is about, is getting the public's input to see which of those philosophies that we should stress.
Well, Sheriff Schulteis, I appreciate you coming in, and I appreciate all that you and your deputies do and everybody on your staff does for the county and for our safety. And again, the referendum's coming up on November 8th, and hope all goes well.
All right. Thank you very much. I sincerely appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you to Sheriff Schulteis for joining me on this week's episode. I appreciate him coming in and laying out the details on the Anti-Crime Plan Referendum, which will be on your Washington County ballot on November 8th, 2022. You can get more details on the Anti-Crime Plan by going to www, and you have to put in the W's, otherwise the site will break. Go to www.washcowizco.gov. The link is front and center on the site. Be sure to put in the W's again if you want to go see that. And then click on the Anti-Crime Plan link, which is right at the top of the page. That'll do it for another episode of 15 Minutes with Fuzz. I do appreciate you listening each and every week. New episodes come out every Tuesday. Have an idea for the show? Email me at 15withfuzz@gmail.com, and we'll talk to you next week right here on 15 Minutes with Fuzz.